Greg Sankey of the SEC, Utah now in the Big 12 are saying things about realignment. Be careful about things that are said.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth, realignment, coaching carousel, the portal, and so much more. We've always got you covered. We'll check in on Louisville. I might be overlooking them. Might. We're just going to have to explore that possibility. And I have a thought about what Michigan could do, all coming up on today's show. But let's start with Greg Sankey, shall we? Everybody's favorite actor in realignment. I don't think Greg Sankey is necessarily a bad guy, but there are those out there in the college football world who would say, well, he's been kind of predatory with his conference and making all these power moves. And from a commissioner standpoint, he's like Roger Goodell. You may not like him for various legitimate reasons. You cannot, however, look at the job he has done with his conference and say, by any objective metric, he's not good at his job. He's very good at his job. He's done a heck of a job. Here's what he said recently. Going to read the quote here, word for word. This was at the SEC meetings recently. This is by Heather Dinich over at ESPN writing. Sankey said the discussions this week are centered around what they can do at the conference level, but future SEC expansion isn't at the top of the priority list right now. This was the first time Texas coach Steve Sarkisian, Oklahoma coach Brent Venables participated in the spring meetings as their respective schools will officially join the SEC on July 1st. That doesn't mean Sankey's not paying attention to the ongoing lawsuits in the ACC, and goes on to talk about that. He said, quote, I'm aware of what's happening around us. I think we're in a really, really great position as a league. We respect that there are agreements and situations that prevent a lot of movement, and so our focus has been on our 16. Mine has been, but I pay attention. We'd be fine if everyone stayed in their current alignment. End quote. Again, that's from Heather Dinich over at ESPN. So allow me to read between the lines here, and I'll get to Utah in just a moment. The last time I heard this sort of language from one of the Power 2 conferences, the Big Ten or the SEC, Tony Petitti had just taken the job as commissioner of the Big Ten. I'm focused on my members. I'm focused on running the league, getting myself settled, and just figuring out what it's like on the Then they added Oregon and Washington, blew up the Pac-12, and started a little bit of a downward spiral there. Words have not really meant a lot, as this realignment saga has been going on for almost 2 full years now. And I just heard that quote, I didn't even I believed the second half of it, that he's aware of what's going on, he pays attention, but then for him to close with, well, you know, we'd be fine if everyone stayed put. Really? You could have been fine without Texas and Oklahoma. Why'd you add them? Because they bring something to the table. Because they have something that makes your league even stronger. And if you were to look, does anyone believe that if Greg Sankey goes through the numbers and says, you know what, we think there is an advantage, whatever that would be, to bringing Florida State and Clemson into the conference if they get out of the ACC, does anyone think he would say no? What indication has there been that he'd say, that's an advantageous move, but we don't need it. We're focused on the 16 here. Big Ten's got 18 teams. What if the Big Ten were to go to 20 with Florida State and Clemson? Could Greg Sankey actually be operating at a deficit of sorts? Probably not. As I talked about a while ago on the show, the SEC still has as many, if not more, national championship caliber programs in the modern era compared to the Big Ten. That calculus would change, though, if you put Florida State and Clemson in the Big Ten. Suddenly they might have the advantage. And maybe that would be Sankey's thinking if he were to go get those schools whenever they're able to get out of the ACC, if they're able to get out of the ACC. But I read that statement and thought, no, not buying that there's suddenly this whole kumbaya feeling. there have been too many instances. This would be Lucy Brown with the football if you read this and think, oh yeah, the SEC's actually done with expansion. No, I don't think that for a moment. Let's go to the other side of realignment here. So there was that report that I talked about and thought was kind of ridiculous earlier this week about Utah. And Utah Athletics put out a statement to refute the report from Dick Weiss, who admittedly is not looking great, not somebody who I know personally, but is not looking great when you have Utah put out the following statement, according to Brett McMurphy, quote, "We are proud to be entering into membership in the Big 12 Conference in the coming months and excited to join our new colleagues and member institutions. A report over the weekend that suggested otherwise is completely fabricated and irresponsible." Now, Utah's athletic department has never once been shy about calling out reports that are inaccurate. They've called them out in the past on multiple occasions. One most notably led to Mark Harlan replying to a report flying around, quote unquote, flying around online. And he said, quote, "Give me a break." That's Utah's athletic director who said that. And this has the same sort of vibe, just from a more polished and professional standpoint. However, Mark Harlan tweeted that once upon a time in response to a made-up report that Utah was going to head to the Big 12. And it's really easy to then go in the comment sections and dunk on Mark Harlan and say, see, they ended up in the Big 12. Not exactly. They did end up in the Big 12 after everything changed. They were never trying to go there. It was never a desirable option for them. It's never what they wanted to do, never what they planned to do, which should factor into the statement that Utah Athletics put out. Maybe they don't have a desire to utilize their unique contract with the Big 12 and try to work their way into the Big 10 or ACC one day in the near future. Maybe they don't, but here's what they've proven in the past. They can like where they are at and think they are in the appropriate conference while also understanding what is best for them in the realignment landscape. And if an offer came around, let's say, I'm just spitballing here, let's say the ACC lost FSU and Clemson, but not North Carolina. They kept them around. If you went out and tried to pick up Utah, that would be the sort of landscape change in which Utah wouldn't be going back on their word. That would have been an inaccurate report. They weren't looking to go to the ACC at that time. But then once something changes, then you adapt to what the situation is in front of you. So with all of this stuff, you see these statements and comments, and this is what we're thinking, this is what we're feeling. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me thrice, I should stop hosting this show. I shall not be fooled. So when I hear that Utah would never consider the ACC, they're not considering the ACC. For now is how that reads. The SEC is not worried about expansion. Okay. That's how that all comes off to me. Drop your thoughts in the YouTube comments or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter, if you care to discuss. I care to discuss Louisville because I might have been overlooking them as I've discussed ACC contenders this year. This episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook. It's winner take all time in the NBA and in the NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every playoff shot count. You can get your college football gambling fix as well. You can bet win totals, conference title odds, national championship odds, anything you could possibly want, even individual games, like the one I talked about on yesterday's show, Miami and Florida. That's Miami minus 3.5 in the Swamp. If you love the Canes, bet Mario Cristobal and company. If you think Billy Napier is going to get it done, you can bet the Gators. Everything you want, FanDuel's got it. Check them out. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. All right, Louisville, let's have a talk. So, I have many a times on this show in the past few months talked about the contenders in the ACC. Florida State, obviously. Clemson, clearly, I think, maybe, possibly. The no transfers, we'll see how it goes. Miami, great transfer portal offseason. I like NC State and the offseason the Wolfpack have had. Talked about them on yesterday's show. And I got to thinking, who else could be in the mix? And I realized Louisville's just sitting there. Just sitting there. And I don't think I've mentioned them enough. I don't think I've mentioned them enough as a team that could appear in the ACC championship game. That is entirely possible. Let's start with Louisville's roster situation, because Jeff Brohm and company have done a heck of a job. They're 44th in returning production, according to Bill Connolly over at ESPN, bringing back about 66% of their team that won 10 games last year. It was a pretty darn good start. It was a 10-2 regular season. Remember that? Louisville was kind of like hunting around a little bit last year for a playoff spot. Like you thought about it, you discussed it. It never got super serious, but you went on a couple dates. And Louisville is absolutely a team that could sneak their way into the playoff, whether you get the auto bid or if you go 10-2. What if they're a game better than last year? What if they're 11-1, lose the ACC title game 11-2, keeping them out of the playoff? I'd be hard pressed to see that happening. I think any 11-win team from a Power 4 conference is making the playoff. So Louisville, if you hear the metric, which of course you did, and I will repeat, that they're 44th in returning production, it's a pretty good place to be. You got 128, 38, 20, 32, something like that, FBS football teams, and they're sitting inside the top 45. That's a pretty darn solid place to be, returning about 2/3 of your roster or your production from a 10-win team a season ago. If I tell you that, how much work do you think Louisville needed to make in the transfer portal? Like, what's your thought? What you think? Well, they probably need to go out. Maybe, you lose seniors, you have kids transfer out. Maybe get like 10, 12 players, most of which are starters, a couple depth pieces in there. I think that could have been just fine. I think I'd still see Louisville's. They brought in 30 transfers, guys and girls watching out there. 30. 3-0. They had 31. Penny Boone flipped his commitment. He went off to West Virginia instead of Louisville, coming over from Toledo. But 31? 31. 14 of those players are from Power 4 schools. That doesn't mean the other 16 aren't any good. I'm just saying they're not pulling guys from the FCS ranks or giving opportunities to group of 5 kids that otherwise weren't going to reach the power ranks. No, these were players who were playing or starting caliber players or scholarship-worthy players at other power schools. Guys like Ja'Cory Brooks, for instance, who was the number 2 receiver in his class in 2021. Yeah, he's at Louisville now. He was at Alabama before. He's at Louisville now. So not every guy was that highly recruited coming out of high school. But you go through and you see a lot of blue chippers, a lot of former blue chip high school recruits that are making their way to Louisville, Kentucky to play for the Card. 30 transfers. 30. I keep saying this because typically a number that large is reserved for like a Colorado that's undergoing basically its entire roster construction via the transfer portal. But Louisville, they're not reconstructing their roster. They're building their roster with that many transfers. So then you think about, okay, well, if they're going to have the roster to be good enough, which on paper they should, to contend for an ACC championship game appearance, what's the quarterback situation? I'm so glad you asked. That's a great question, random listener or viewer, whom I appreciate. Tyler Shuck is their quarterback. That is a former 4-star recruit many a moons ago over at Oregon. Got his chance to start. Didn't work out. There were some weird things over there. He goes to Texas Tech. The couple seasons that he spent with Texas Tech, unfortunately marred by injuries, so you got to keep him healthy. This is, though, an experienced veteran quarterback whose record, whilst upright and playing the entire game as a Red Raider, was rather good. If memory serves, he won about the first 7 or 8 starts in which he started and finished the game. Now that's the key. That Louisville offensive line going to have to keep him upright. If they do that, Don't tell me you can't win football games with him. And last year, Louisville was in the ACC championship game against Florida State with Jack Plummer, a quarterback. This is not a hate on Jack Plummer segment. This is a recognize what Jack Plummer is at the quarterback situation. He's okay. He's fine. Serviceable. Cable makes a good throw every now and then. If you gave me a choice between those two guys formerly of the Pac-12 at different points in their careers, RIP, I'm going with Tyler Shough. I don't know if Shough is, a top 3 quarterback in the ACC. He's probably not. He brings more to the table from an arm talent and mobility standpoint than Jack Plummer did last year. So you keep him upright. Louisville's schedule, pretty workable, pretty doable. Let's look at it. They open with Austin Peay at home. Then Jacksonville State at home. That's an FCS team and a school that was an FCS program about 2 years ago. Okay, so you got a couple of wins there. Then you on September 21st, again at home, they play Georgia Tech before they go at Notre Dame and then come back home to play SMU again. This is an upbeat Louisville segment. The devil's advocate in my ear, or the evil Dwayne Wade on my shoulder here, drop a comment if you understand that reference, is telling me that if Louisville isn't careful, they could lose 2 of these 3 games. Georgia Tech, Notre Dame, SMU. Home, road, home. At Notre Dame, that's going to be a difficult football game. That's going to be really hard to win. Going to South Bend, not an easy thing to do. You know they're going to show up. Not a whole lot going on over there. And Notre Dame football, biggest game in town, which is the way it should be in every college town. I don't care if you're in Los Angeles. College football should be the biggest game in town. So that's a challenging one. But Georgia Tech and SMU new to the ACC, of course, with Rhett Lashley and company. And Georgia Tech, I've talked about them before. Don't hate their offseason. Bringing back their coach, bringing back their quarterback. Watch out. Watch out, Louisville, I'm just saying. So then you play those games. Then you go at Virginia. Should be able to win that game. Host Miami. That is one of the most intriguing football games in the ACC. That could very well be the game that determines which of those teams, Miami and Louisville, goes over their win total. Miami's is 9.5. Louisville's is 8.5. That game's being played in Louisville, Kentucky. That's a good football game. Then they wrap up by going at Boston College. Should win that game. Should, emphasizing should. They go at Clemson. That's a tough one to win. At Stanford. Long trip. All I'm saying, long trip. Host Pittsburgh and then go at Kentucky. It's not the least, for those of you who have seen Ocean's 11, it's not the least accessible system I've seen, but it's close. If you're designing a difficult path to get to the ACC championship game that doesn't include Florida State, this is probably what it would look like. Reminder, Notre Dame is a non-conference game, but they have to play Miami at home. They've got to go all the way across the country to play Stanford, who I think are going to be improved, and they have to go at Clemson. And last week of the season, they have to go at Kentucky. There are a lot of losable games on this schedule. Now, the upside for Louisville is, let's say they were to, improve by 1 game their record from a year ago. With all the transfers and what I think is a better quarterback situation, if they go from 10-2 to 11-1, the Louisville Cardinals shall be a playoff team. That is not even a doubt in my mind. The number of quality wins you would have in there, you would have beaten 2 out of 3 of Clemson, Miami, Notre Dame. Boy, that'd be impressive. That'd be very, very impressive. This is a pretty tough schedule for Louisville, though. And I think one of the reasons that I haven't talked about them a ton, I think they've got a good coach. I like, not love, but like what they have in the quarterback situation. I like their roster. I like their roster a lot. The schedule is pretty tough. The schedule is pretty tough. The good news, they get to ease into it with Austin Peay and Jacksonville State. But Louisville, 8.5. Right now, I might lean under. I might lean under. Record predictions are not being officially made on this show here in the month of May. That comes in August, and we will, maybe even July. We will definitely get there. But Louisville, an interesting team, cannot be overlooked in the ACC. Speaking of teams to overlook, can you overlook the national champions from a year ago? You can. I have a question about Michigan, though, and we're going to answer that coming up next. All right, so here's my question about Michigan. How are they going to play in 2024? Spencer, what are you talking about? Michigan's quarterback situation is currently, for those on podcast, that was me shrugging my shoulders. I mean, could be this, could be that, could be Alex Orji, could not be Alex Orji, the other guys in the room. I don't know. Do you remember the Penn State-Michigan game last year? If you were a Nittany Lion fan, I suggest turning off the show. It's the only time I will ever suggest that you don't listen to or watch this show. Because, of course, I am here to try and get you all to watch. And I thank you for doing so. But the Penn State game, oh, man. I've legitimately never seen anything like it. And so Michigan is returning several starters along their offensive line. They've lost a number of key pass catchers. They are 128th in returning production. 36% from a year ago. That's not much. The good news is a foundation of their team last year was the run game. And Blake Corum, he's in the NFL now. But Donovan Edwards is still there. I don't think there's much of a drop-off. I like Blake Corum a lot. I thought Blake Corum was the best running back in last year's NFL draft class, and he would have been the number one running back if I had put together a massive big board. Donovan Edwards can give you at least 85 to 90% of that production level. So, questions at quarterback, returning starters along the offensive line. Wink Martindale comes in to be the defensive coordinator. And those NFL hires, sometimes they click and sometimes they flame out, right? Think about it from a head coaching standpoint. Herm Edwards eventually flamed out. Jed Fish was kind of a home run, and I think he'll succeed at Washington as well. You just never know. And he's putting together, speaking of NFL coaches, he's got Steve Belichick as his defensive coordinator over there in Seattle. But we're talking about Michigan here. Those two teams play again this year, by the way, in Seattle. Michigan currently a 9.5-point road favorite against Washington on October 5th. It was 11.5. That line has moved down. That's a big number for a team that is usually pretty good at home at the very least. They're going to have an extra fired up crowd because Michigan beat them in the national championship game last year. So my question about Michigan is, what percentage of the time are they going to run the football? Because the Penn State game last year was, if memory serves, we had 27 consecutive runs. There was a called pass in the second half for J.J. McCarthy, but it was pass interference, so that doesn't actually go down as a pass attempt. It goes down as a penalty, of course. Every other play was a run. Who was calling those plays? Let's put our thinking caps on. Think. Ooh, I got it. It was Sharon Moore. He's the head coach at Michigan now. So, Penn State last year, this is honestly maybe the most interesting part about Michigan's season. You've got quarterback questions. Most of your strong returning production is in the run game, which was dynamic last year. You should have a good defense again. The defensive line is going to be nasty. I think there can be some questions in the secondary when they lost, some key guys like Mikey Sanders still. But you can have a really good defensive line. Should have a well-coordinated defense. Is Michigan just going to run the ball like 75% of the time? Legitimate question. If they do, in a pass-happy world of college football, somewhere, Paul Johnson, former Georgia Tech head coach, has just got to be smiling, going, told you guys, you don't need to throw it. You can just run it as often as you want. So here's Michigan's schedule for those who don't have it memorized. They open with Fresno State and Texas and Arkansas State and USC. They play their first 4 games at home. I don't know how Michigan pulls this off every year. I really don't. It seems like they never play on the road early in the season. Anyway, That's not exactly a cupcake schedule. I think it's the exact opposite. Go 3-1 in those games. I think you're doing very well. That means you have a win over either USC or Texas, both teams that I'm high on coming into 2024. Then they host Minnesota. First 5 games are at home. How do they do that? I don't know. Teach me your ways. At Washington, that's their first road game. It's going to be a hostile environment at the very least. At Illinois, host Michigan State, host Oregon, at Indiana, host Northwestern, at Ohio State. So when you think back to last year's game, they play Penn State. They run the ball just about all the time. Penn State was a really good football team. If the 12-team playoff had existed last year, Penn State would have been in. They were 10-2. They lost to Ohio State and Michigan. Where have I heard that one before? If they could do that last year against the playoff team, when I listed their 12 opponents in your head, ask yourself this question. How many of them could you get away with running the ball 75 to 80% of the time? How many? And just grind out like a 17-10 win in true Big Ten fashion. Because the only team on here, well, I see 2, maybe 3. I see probably 3 teams I don't think that could work against on paper. Texas, Oregon, Ohio State. Those teams in the trenches, probably too good to just pound the rock all the time. Offenses, probably too dynamic to try and score 14 to 17 points to win the game. But everybody else, don't tell me you can't do that against USC. Look, I like USC's offseason as much as anyone. We haven't seen the results yet. They've improved. They're better on paper. Lincoln Riley team's still not exactly known for being the greatest at tackling or playing defense or being physical. Look at what Utah did during the last couple of years. They ran the football a bunch, did a little play action. That game's at home, too, for Michigan on CBS. Oh, man. It's supposed to be the SEC on CBS, but it's not anymore. It's not anymore. So if Michigan was good enough last year to just run the ball almost exclusively to beat a 10-2 Penn State team, does Sharon Moore just line up this year and say, you know what? We're just going to pound the rock. And we're going to control the clock. We are going to look like last year's Michigan team, like early 2010 Jim Harbaugh Stanford teams. We are going to run the ball and the clock into the ground. Clock doesn't stop on first downs. Let's shorten the game. Let's play to our strengths. Trust our defense. And be physical running the ball. And just call a play action pass every now and then. That's what I'm fascinated to see. The question is, can you do that and get to the Big Ten championship game or the college football playoff? Can you go 10-2, which would include beating Texas? Like if Michigan were to not make the Big Ten title game and make the college football playoff, they'd have to beat Texas. They have to beat Texas, but then they could lose to Ohio State and Oregon. Buckeyes and Ducks go play for the Big Ten championship. Michigan would then be in the playoff at 10-2 with a win over Texas. That's absolutely going to get you in. Can they win just one of those games? They win that Texas game, lose the other 2. Can they do it that way? I don't know. My gut says you need a little bit more against those teams. I mean, you're going up against Will Howard, Dylan Gabriel, and Quinn Ewers. Michigan's probably going to be a quarterback deficit in all 3 of those games. But we know Sharon Moore likes to scheme and run game, likes to enforce physicality, and I wonder just how much they're going to be able to do that this year. I think they're going to do it a lot, and a lot of games will look like Iowa games last year or the Penn State game a season ago. I'm going to enjoy it no matter what. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.